Scoreboard flashed her name in red. Disqualified. Emily Carter stood at the firing line with a perfect score and a tampered rifle she hadn't touched. 3 years ago, they took her career. Today, someone was trying to take her life. Crowd didn't know. The cameras didn't know. But Emily knew because she'd found the memory card, and the memory card showed everything. One woman, one truth, and a building full of people who needed her dead before she could prove it. Before we go further, if you're new here, subscribe to the and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a like if you're already hooked, and tell me in the comments, what city and country are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go. The desert doesn't care who you used to be. That was the thing about Arizona in late September. The land out here had been indifferent to human ambition for 10,000 years and showed no signs of changing. The scrub and the pale rock and the long, dry ridgelines running west toward nothing stretched out in every direction, like a reminder that whatever mattered to you, it didn't matter to the land. Emily Carter found that useful. She had driven 4 hours from her apartment in Albuquerque with her gear bag in the back of her truck and a gas station coffee she'd stopped caring about somewhere around this line. And by the time she pulled off the highway onto the access road for Black Ridge Shooting Complex, the Johnston Smithan, the indifference of the landscape was one of the few things she actively appreciated. It was 5:43 in the morning. The sun was still below the eastern ridge. The air had the particular dry chill of high desert before heat, not cold exactly, but honest about its own temperature in a way that cities rarely were. Black Ridge sat in a natural valley about 40 miles northeast of Tucson, and from this access road, it looked like most things built for serious function rather than impression. Prefabricated structures in faded tan, a water tower, chain link fencing running the perimeter in hard straight lines, and beyond the fencing, the geometry of the range itself berms, barriers, target positions, the skeletal framework of the control tower rising above the main line like a watchtower someone had forgotten to man. Emily had competed here twice before. She knew the layout the way she knew her own kitchen, not because she found it comfortable, but because she had spent enough time in it to stop noticing the wall. The National Tactical Shooting Championship had been held at Black Ridge for 11 consecutive years. It drew the best practical shooters in the country, military veterans, law enforcement professionals, competitive civilians who had earned their way through regional qualifiers. 22 shooters in the national bracket this year. Prize money, industry sponsorships, broadcast coverage from a tactical sports network that live-streamed the final stages. Emily had her competition credentials checked at the main gate by a volunteer who looked about 9 and hadn't fully woken up yet. He scanned her badge, looked at his screen, and held there a beat too long before handing it back. Bay 7, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. Staging opens at 6:30. Thanks. She took the badge. Anyone from the Eastern District already checked in? He glanced at his tablet with the reluctance of someone following a rule he wasn't sure applied. I'm not really supposed to, I know. She looked at him. Just looked. I'm asking anyway. A pause. Pierce checked in about 40 minutes ago. She nodded and walked toward the staging area. Logan Pierce. She had known he'd be here. He was always here at every significant regional event, every national qualifier, every competition that came attached to cameras and prize money and the kind of visibility that put your face on industry websites. He was 26 years old, 6 feet even, with the square jaw and easy posture of someone who had been photographed enough times to understand instinctively how light fell on him. His competition record was exceptional. His sponsorship portfolio was substantial. He had a social media following that numbered in the hundreds of thousands, built on a careful mix of tactical content, competition highlights, and the particular brand of confident accessibility that made audiences feel like they personally knew him. Emily had never particularly trusted a spotless record. She found her locker bay in the staging area and set her gear bag on the bench. The room smelled of hoppies, solvent, and old rubber matting, a combination she had always found strangely steadying the smell of preparation of serious work done in serious places. 3 other competitors were already there. 2 men she recognized from the Southern Circuit, who nodded at her without comment, and a woman at the far end of the bench running a function check on a bolt-action rifle with the focused economy of someone who had nothing to say to anyone and no interest in starting. Emily appreciated that. She set her rifle case on the bench and worked the combination locks. Pelican case, foam-lined, the same one she'd used for 3 years. Popped the latches and lifted the lid. Her rifle looked exactly as she'd left it. She told herself that was fine. There was a faint unease at the back of her attention, not anxiety, nothing as structured as that, more like the low-frequency alertness that had developed somewhere between her 3rd deployment and her 2nd year of competitive shooting. The sense that something was slightly off without being able to put a name to the specific thing. She had learned over years of operating in environments where that feeling sometimes meant the difference between functioning and not, to take it seriously without letting it consume her. She lifted the rifle from the foam, ran a visual inspection of the barrel, checked the action, cleared the chamber, dry-fired twice to check trigger feel and reset. Trigger felt right. She set the rifle on the bench rest and started on her magazine check. By 6:15, the staging area had filled up. The 22 championship competitors represented a range of backgrounds and approaches that Emily found herself cataloging without fully meaning to old habit, kind of automatic assessment that military environments train into you and that never quite goes away. She knew some of them by name or reputation. The 2 men from the Southern Circuit, Reyes and Callahan, were solid midfield competitors, consistent but unlikely to threaten the top. A woman named Sandra Kwan, who had come up through law enforcement and won the federal bracket twice. A former Marine named Tapper, who shot with a precision that always surprised people who judge him by his size. Emily kept to herself. She worked through her pre-match routine, magazine function checks, ammunition count, a careful review of the stage diagrams she'd spent 2 hours studying at the motel the previous night. 7 stages across the complex. Stage 1 was a standard accuracy course stationary targets, 50 to 300 yards, scored on hit placement and time. Stage 2 introduced movement, cover positions, and the electronic pop-up target system that Blackridge had installed 4 years ago as part of a range modernization program. Emily had notes on the electronic system. She'd done her research. She was still reviewing the Stage 3 diagram when she heard him come in. She didn't look up immediately. She finished the line she was reading. Then she set the diagram down and turned. Logan Pierce stood at the bay entrance with 2 people behind him, what appeared to be a coach carrying a range bag, and a younger man with a small mirrorless camera, kind Logan's team used for the behind-the-scenes content that went up on his chancels between competitions. Logan was in full sponsor kit, branded jacket, matching pants, boots that probably cost $300, and had been worn in enough real ranges to look credibly worn in rather than fresh out of the box. He was smiling, relaxed and easy, the way people smile when they know the camera is running. Emily Carter, he said, like the name was a punchline he'd been saving. She waited. Didn't really think you'd actually show up. He scanned the bay with mild curiosity. The way you look at a room you have no real investment in. I mean, I knew you'd entered. I just figured, I'm here, she said. Yeah. He looked at her rifle on the bench rest. You are. A beat. Brave, genuinely. I'll give you that. The woman at the far end of the bench stopped working on her bolt action. Reyes and Callahan were very still. Emily looked at Logan. Back for another scandal, he said. It landed in the room with the weight, These things always land with the kind of question that isn't really a question, that's designed to do a specific job and does it efficiently. She felt it. She was aware of every person in the bay being aware of her response. She held his gaze for a moment that was just long enough to be something. "Go find something useful to do," she said. "Match starts in 40 minutes. Logan's smile didn't disappear. It recalibrated the shift of someone who has made their point and is fully content to let it stand. He gave a small nod, almost appreciative, and turned and walked out with his camera operator trailing behind him. The bay was quiet. Emily turned back to her stage diagram. Her hands were steady. She was proud of that in a way she didn't show. The thing about being accused of something you didn't do is that it follows you in ways that guilt never could. Guilt is internal. You carry it in yourself, and you set it down when you decide to. Accusation lives in other people's mouths and other people's memories, and it turns up 3 years later in the smirk of a 26-year-old champion who has never once competed in conditions that weren't arranged for his benefit. 3 years ago, at the Western Regional Tactical Championship in Nevada, Emily had finished first overall. She had then been accused of interfering with the electronic scoring system, specifically of manipulating target hit data to inflate her Stage 3 score. The evidence presented against her was a set of access logs showing her competition credentials used at a scoring console during a window when the system recorded irregular data inputs. She had told the investigating panel that she hadn't been at that console. She had no witnesses who could place her elsewhere during the relevant time. Panel ruled against her. She was stripped of her result, suspended from national competition for 2 years, and placed under a reputational shido that had effectively ended her professional career in competitive shooting. Her military service record had been reviewed. Not formally sanctioned, they hadn't found enough to touch it directly. But in the informal economy of military culture, the damage was real. You didn't shake a fraud accusation without paying for it. You just carried the weight and hoped eventually the weight became ordinary enough that you stopped noticing it. She had spent the suspension years working as an instructor at a regional range in New Mexico, being sharp, entering every qualifying event she was eligible for as soon as the suspension lifted, building her scores in competitions where physical targets and human judges with clipboards made the results harder to question. She was here because she had earned it. She was also here because something had never sat right about Nevada, and she intended to understand what. Stage 1 went the way it should. Emily moved through the accuracy course with the controlled calm she had spent years training herself into not relaxed, because relaxed was a different thing, but centered, deliberate. She read the wind off the ridge the way she'd learned to read wind in environments considerably less forgiving than this, made adjustments automatically, settled into each position, and let the shot happen rather than forcing it. Her shots landed where she was aiming. The electronic targets registered 8 of 10. She stood at the exit and looked at the score. Then she looked back at the targets, still in their engaged positions, waiting for the reset crew. At 50 yards, the impact marks in the steel faces were visible. Counted them. 10. She wrote both numbers in her notebook. Said nothing to the stage official, walked back to the staging area, and sat with the information for a few minutes before the Stage 2 block opened. She told herself one anomaly was one anomaly. Stage 2 was a movement course, a serpentine path through constructed barriers, plywood panels, and sandbag walls arranged to create a series of covered positions. Electronic pop-up targets appeared at intervals on pneumatic mounts, presenting for a fixed time window before dropping. Competitors engaged each target as it presented, moving between cover positions according to the stage layout. Scoring was determined by hit placement and engagement time, with data transmitted from optical sensors in the target faces to the central scoring system in the control tower. Emily had studied the stage diagram long enough that the course had a rhythm in her head before she stepped onto it. She moved cleanly, left around the first barrier, engaged the pair at 12 meters, stepped into cover behind the sandbag wall, tracked the far target at 45 meters as it came up and broke the shot in the first 2 seconds of the presentation window. 3-position string at the end, standing to kneeling to prone, 1 shot per target. The steel rang on every shot. That particular clean report, not the dull thud of a near miss or the sharp crack of a complete miss, but the solid metallic ring of a center hit on thick steel. Emily had heard it 10,000 times in ranges and training environments across 2 continents. She knew the difference the way a musician knows when a note is true. She stepped through the exit gate and checked the interim score display. 2 misses. She stood there. Read the number twice. Let herself feel the temptation to doubt her own shots and then released it, because doubt was the enemy and she had not missed. She looked back at the stage. The targets were still extended, waiting for reset. At her distance from the exit gate, she could see the impact marks in the face of the far target, 2 of them, dark divots in the painted steel, exactly where she'd aimed. She walked back to the staging area and said nothing to anyone. But she watched the next 3 competitors cycle through stage 2 from the observation fence. She watched carefully. She was looking for something specific, and she found it. The small pause at the score display, the slight tension in a shooter's face when the number doesn't match the number in their head. The recalibration, the private doubt. 2 of the 3 showed it. Most competitors would swallow that and move on. You trusted the system before you trusted your own perception, especially under competition pressure. Doubt was the enemy. She understood the impulse. She didn't swallow things easily. She found Derek Vaughn behind the control tower, working a diagnostic laptop connected to a junction box on the scoring console infrastructure. Mid-40s, heavy-set in the shoulders, careful with his hands in the way of someone who worked regularly with expensive electronics. His name was on the range staff roster she'd photographed in the main building. "Hey," she said. He looked up. "I had some scoring anomalies in stage 2. 2 recorded misses that don't match my actual shot placement." She kept her voice even. "I'd like to look at the raw sensor logs." Something moved across his face. Not quite a flinch, more the involuntary tightening of someone who has just heard a word they were hoping not to hear. "You can file a formal score review after the match concludes," he said. "That's the standard process. I know the process. I'm asking you directly. It's not standard procedure to minutes. I understand it's not standard." She held his gaze. "I'm asking you anyway." His eyes moved, brief, involuntary upward, and to the left, toward the control tower structure rising above them. Then back. "Forget what you saw," he said, barely above a whisper. Like the words came out before he fully decided to say them. Emily went very still. "What did you just say?" He looked down at his laptop. His jaw tightened. When he spoke again, his voice was louder, more careful, the voice of a man performing normalcy for an audience he suspected might be watching. "I said you should file the formal review. That's the correct process. You told me to forget what I saw." "I didn't say anything like that." She looked at him. He was staring at his screen with the focus of a man who very much needed this conversation to be over. "Because the people running this match don't want anyone asking questions," she said. Quietly, repeating it back to him like something she was trying to understand. His hands stopped moving on the keyboard. 1 second. 2. Then he started typing again. "Stage 3 opens in 18 minutes, he said. "You should prepare." Emily held still for a moment longer, reading him the way she had learned to read people in situations where the information they weren't saying mattered more than what they were. Then she turned and walked back toward the staging area. Her bay was empty when she returned. She sat on the bench with her hands flat on her knees and breathed through it the way she had been taught to breathe through situations that wanted to run away with your thinking. Cataloged what she had. Electronic scoring inconsistencies across at least 2 stages, with physical evidence contradicting recorded data. Technician who had, in one unguarded second, told her to forget what she saw, before catching himself and retreating. An involuntary glance at the control tower. The phrase, "the people running this match." Not proof. Signal. She had spent enough time in environments where information was the primary resource to know the difference. Signal was the thing under the surface. The pattern the experienced part of your brain had detected before the conscious part caught up. You didn't ignore signal just because you couldn't name it yet. She looked at her rifle on the bench rest, and then she looked at it again, more carefully, with a different kind of attention. She had been a military sniper for 6 years. She had run 0 checks in field conditions that made this range look comfortable. She inspected her equipment with the compulsive thoroughness of someone whose life had, on multiple occasions, depended entirely on a single mechanical function performing correctly. It took her 27 seconds to find it. The modification was small, deliberate. It required genuine knowledge of the specific rifle platform to execute not something an amateur could manage, not something that would be visible to anyone who wasn't looking with purpose. It was the kind of work that would not cause an immediate malfunction. It would cause one, eventually under stress, in a way that would be consistent with user error rather than sabotage. A dangerous malfunction. The kind that could put a shooter in a medical situation. Kind that would look like her fault. Emily stood up very slowly. She set the rifle down with care. She went to her equipment case. She was thorough. She checked the foam lining, the exterior panels, the handle recess. It took her 4 minutes. She found the neoprene sleeve in the false bottom, wedged between the foam and the case wall, thin enough that it wouldn't affect the lid closure, positioned where it wouldn't shift during transport. Inside the sleeve was a memory card, standard SD format, no markings, no label. She held it in her palm. It weighed almost nothing. She looked at the bay entrance, still empty. She slid the card into the interior pocket of her vest, re-secured the zipper, and went to find the equipment marshal to report a mechanical issue with her primary rifle. She borrowed a backup rifle for stage 3, citing a mechanical malfunction with her primary, which was accurate, if incomplete. The marshal logged it without much interest. Equipment issues were a normal part of competition operations. She shot stage 3 poorly, not disastrously, but well below her capacity. The backup had a different trigger weight, a slightly different cheek weld geometry, and she hadn't had time to calibrate for it. She absorbed the performance deficit without letting it spiral. Damage control, assess, adjust, continue. What she did not absorb without reaction was watching Logan Pierce complete stage 3 with a clean, perfect score after she had, from the observation fence, seen him pull one shot clearly wide on the final target string. The steel at that position did not ring. Emily was close enough that she would have heard it, and she did not hear it. His scorecard read perfect. She watched him collect it. Watched him accept congratulations from his coach and say something into the camera his operator was running. Carried it lightly, the way people carry things they have always expected. She didn't know if he knew. That was the honest answer. She didn't know if Logan Pierce was a participant in whatever was happening to the scoring system, or if he was simply a beneficiary who had never thought to question the numbers, because the numbers had always been good to him. She filed the question and moved on. After the day's stages completed, she drove the 15 miles back to the motel and sat on the bed with her laptop and a card reader she had in her kit for backing up range footage. The memory card contained 17 files. Most were corrupted partial video, incomplete data segments, file headers attached to nothing. Somebody's had run a partial wipe. But 3 files were intact, and she opened them in order. The first was 41 seconds of security camera footage. High angle, wide coverage, a competition range's control station. Timestamp in the corner read 3 years and 4 months prior. The Nevada competition. She recognized the console layout. Immediately, she had spent enough time trying to reconstruct those exact minutes in her mind that the geography of that control room was part of her. A figure in range staff clothing worked the scoring console interface for approximately 25 seconds. The camera angle and the figure's body positioning made facial identification impossible. Staff badge on their vest was visible. She advanced frame by frame. The resolution was poor. The name printed on the badge was not legible. Staff identification number below the name was barely legible. She wrote it down carefully. The second segment was 11 seconds. Different angle. Closer, possibly, a secondary camera she hadn't known about, positioned lower, which explained why no one had used it in the original investigation. It was close enough that she could see the badge more clearly. Still not the name, but the number confirmed. The third file was audio only. 23 seconds of a telephone conversation, one side only, recorded mid-call as if someone had started recording, after the call was already in progress. Can't use her credentials again? It's too exposed. Static. 3 seconds. Carter takes the fall. The whole operation closes. Nobody looks at the system. Static. 4 seconds. Hale wants it finished before the final stage. So, the recording cut off. Emily sat on the edge of the motel bed and looked at the opposite wall. The name sat in the room with her. Hale. Marcus Hale. Director of Championship Operations for the National Tactical Shooting Association. The man who had personally overseen the investigation panel that disqualified her 3 years ago. The man who had given a measured public statement expressing regret about the situation while firmly and professionally upholding the panel's findings. The man who had, in a brief private moment before the formal ruling was announced, taken her aside and told her he was sorry about how things had unfolded and that he genuinely hoped she could find a way to rebuild. She had thanked him. She had believed him. She thought about that for a long time in the dark motel room with the AC unit cycling on and off and the desert outside lying completely flat and silent in every direction. Then she put the laptop away, checked the door lock, checked the window latch, and sat with her back against the headboard and her eyes on the ceiling. At 2:58 in the morning, her phone buzzed once on the nightstand. Unknown number. A text message, 7 words. We know what you found. Put it back. Emily read it twice. Let the screen go dark. Sat in the dark. She did not put it back. But she understood now, clearly and without the comfort of ambiguity, that she was no longer competing in a shooting championship. She was in something older and less structured, the kind of situation where the people on the other side had already decided how far they were willing to go, and she had not yet finished deciding how far she was willing to go herself. She checked the door lock a second time, checked the window, set the phone face down, and in the silence of the Arizona desert at 3 in the morning, with a memory card in her vest pocket and a modified rifle sitting tagged as evidence in her equipment bag, Emily Carter did not sleep. She waited for morning, and morning, she knew, was going to ask her something she couldn't take back. She was still awake when the sky outside the motel window began to gray. Not the pale gold of actual sunrise that was still 40 minutes off, but the slow, colorless lightening that happens first, that when the dark stops being fully dark and the shapes of things return without any warmth behind them. Emily had sat against the headboard for most of the night, with her vest across her lap, and the memory card zipped into the interior pocket, and her thoughts moving in careful, deliberate circuits, the way they always moved when she was working a problem she couldn't afford to get wrong. She had a name on an audio recording. She had a staff ID number from a security footage fragment. She had a text message from an unknown number that confirmed someone was watching her closely enough to know she'd found the card within hours of her finding it. What she did not have was anything she could walk into a formal proceeding with. Not yet. Evidence that had been planted, and she was operating on the assumption that the card had been placed in her case deliberately, either as a warning or as a test or as something she hadn't fully worked out yet, was evidence with a chain of custody problem. Whoever left it there could as easily claim she had fabricated it. She needed something cleaner, something that didn't have her fingerprints on the origin story. She needed Derek Vaughn. Showered, dressed, ate half a protein bar she found in the bottom of her gear bag, and drove back to Blackridge in the gray pre-dawn with the heater running low and the radio off. The range was already active when she arrived. Range staff moved between the stage areas, making adjustments, running equipment checks, resetting target positions from the previous day's stages. The scoring technicians were up in the control tower. She could see the lights through the tower windows, figures moving against the glass. She found Derek at the main equipment junction, behind the scoring infrastructure building, the same place she'd found him the day before. He was drinking coffee from a thermos and looking at something on his laptop with the particular focused blankness of a man who hadn't slept either. He saw her coming, and his shoulders tightened before she was within 20 feet. "I need to talk to you," she said. "I'm working. I know you're working." She stopped a few feet away, close enough that their conversation stayed between them. I found the memory card. His hand with the coffee thermos went very still. "I don't know what you're—" "The neoprene sleeve in the false bottom of my equipment case." She kept her voice flat and low. 17 files. 3 intact. One of them has audio. It mentions Hale. Derek set the thermos down on top of the equipment housing. He said it carefully. The way you put something down when your hands aren't entirely steady and don't want that to show. "Who else have you talked to?" He said nobody. Yet. He looked at her. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he had the drawn, contracted look of someone who had been afraid for long enough that it had started to wear through his face. "Should have left it alone," he said. "You should have found that card and put it back and walked away. It has evidence that my disqualification 3 years ago was fabricated. I know what it has." The words landed between them. Emily waited. "You know," she said. "Not a question." Derek picked up his thermos and looked away from her, out toward the ridgeline above the range, where the sky was beginning to carry its first suggestion of color. His jaw worked. He was putting something together internally. She could see it in the way he held himself. The quality of the silence. "Found the original scoring log 6 months ago," he said finally. "The ones from Nevada, they should have been purged with the rest of the system data. But they were archived in a partition that wasn't included in the standard wipe cycle. I found them running a diagnostic on the legacy system." He stopped. Scores were accurate. Every shot you took in Stage 3 was recorded as a hit. The data was altered afterward. Someone with administrative credentials went into the archive and modified the log. Emily held very still. "I pulled the access records," Derek said. The modification was made using Director Hale's credentials. The desert morning was very quiet around them. Somewhere in the range, a steel target rang from a function test shot, the sound carrying clean and sharp across the flat ground. "Why didn't you report it?" Emily said. Derek looked at her. "Because 3 days after I found the log, someone broke into my car and left a photograph on the passenger seat." He said it without drama, just the flat delivery of a fact he had been living with for a long time. It was a picture of my daughter. She was at her school, on the playground. Someone was close enough to take a clear photograph of her face. Emily said nothing. "I have the logs," Derek said. "Copied them. I've been carrying them for 6 months, trying to figure out what to do with them and not quite managing to decide, which I understand makes me a coward, and I'm not going to argue with you about that." He looked at the ground. "I put the card in your case because I don't know what I thought, that you'd find it and take it somewhere, that it would be out of my hands. It's not a coward's move to protect your daughter. Don't." He said it sharply, then softened. "Don't make it easier than it is. I sat on evidence that would have cleared your name for 6 months." Emily let that land without softening it for him. He was right, and he knew he was right, and he didn't need her to disagree. Where are the logs? She said. Server room. Secondary archive partition. Building 3. I have the access. He paused. There's more than just Nevada. I've been going through the old data. This has been happening across multiple championships. The scoring anomalies, the administrative credential access, the data modifications. At least 4 competitions over the past 5 years. Competitors who were eliminated or disqualified for score irregularities. He looked at her. It's not about winning matches. What is it about? Derek was quiet for a moment. The scoring system, he said. The electronic target platform. It was developed by a defense contractor, Harlan Systems, based out of Virginia. The NTSA licensed the technology 5 years ago, but the competition installations aren't just competitions. He stopped, as if he was still deciding how much to say. The system tracks ballistic data, shot placement, trajectory calculation, environmental compensation. Every hit is logged at a resolution that goes way beyond what you need for scoring. Muzzle velocity, terminal velocity, angle of impact. The kind of data that has weapons development applications. Emily felt something settle into place in her chest, not relief. Nothing like relief, but the particular heaviness of understanding something you had already half known. They're using the competition as a data collection platform, she said. Field testing, Derek said. Top-level competitive shooters, real environmental variables, clean data from a controlled range with calibrated targets. No lab, no range limitation, no consent disclosure. And if someone starts noticing the anomalies, he stopped. They get disqualified, Emily said, and discredited. Derek nodded. Once. Slowly. Emily looked at the control tower. Who else knows, she said. On the staff? He shook his head. I don't know. I genuinely don't know who's in it and who's just doing their job. Part of what makes it. That's part of why I haven't. He stopped again. Picked up the thermos. Put it down. Hale will be in the tower for the full competition day. He's always in the tower during active stages. And the scoring irregularities from yesterday. Stage 1, Stage 2. Already in the log. His voice was quiet. Your real scores are in the raw sensor data. The modified scores go into the public record. Can you pull the raw data today, while the competition is running? Derek looked at her for a long moment. If I do that, he said, the people watching this system are going to know someone accessed the archive during active competition hours. It'll flag, and they'll know it was me. I know. Quiet. My daughter's 12, he said. Emily didn't say anything. She held the silence because it deserved to be held. I have the logs already copied, Derek said. That's what I can give you right now. If you can get them out and into the right hands before Hale realizes what's happening. He stopped. There's a federal marshal who covers sports fraud investigations. Name's Teller, out of the Phoenix field office. I made contact 6 weeks ago. Anonymous, through a forwarding service. He knows something is coming. He doesn't know from who or when. Does he know your name? No. Does he know mine? Derek shook his head. Emily looked at the range around them. The morning light was fully established now, pale gold on the pale rock and the steel equipment housings. Competitors were beginning to move through the main gate for the day's stages. She could see Logan Pierce near the main building with his coach, reviewing something on a tablet. Stage 4 today, she said. And 5. Yes. How long does it take you to pull the complete archive? 20 minutes, maybe 30. I have to do it from the physical terminal in the server room. Can't be done remotely without triggering a flag. Tonight, she said, after the stages close. Derek looked at her. And if they're watching, he said. Then we'll have a problem, Emily said. But we'll have it with the data, not without it. He was quiet for a long moment, looking at the ridge. Tonight, he said. Building 3 after 9. I'll leave the side door unlatched. Emily nodded. She picked up her gear bag from the ground where she'd set it. Picture they left, she said, of your daughter. Do you still have it? Yes. Keep it. That's evidence, too. She walked toward the staging area. Stage 4 was a precision long-distance course, 300 to 600 yards, stationary targets, no time pressure, pure accuracy under environmental conditions. Kind of stage that Emily should have owned. She was shooting the borrowed backup rifle again, which put her at a disadvantage she had spent part of the pre-dawn hours trying to mentally compensate for, and the compensation was partial at best. She found a rhythm in the first position. The backup rifle had a heavier trigger pull than she preferred, which meant she was managing a small degree of trigger lag that she had to consciously account for on every shot. It was the kind of variable that over a full stage accumulated. She knew it was accumulating. She shot through it anyway. At the 300-yard station, her shots landed cleanly. She heard the steel. The recorded score matched. She made note of that. The system was not uniformly corrupt, or it was being selectively applied. Either way, the fact that some scores were clean made the corrupted ones harder to identify through comparison alone. 400-yard station, one shot registered as a miss. She had heard the ring. She marked it in her notebook and moved to the next position, and so twin, without showing any reaction. What she did notice at the 400-yard station was the scoring console positioned at the observer's position, 20 feet to her left. A range staff member was stationed there, standard practice, someone to monitor the electronic readout and manage any immediate technical issues. She had seen the same thing at every stage. But this staff member was not watching the target system readout. He was watching her. Not in the way officials watch competitors, the evaluative, process-focused attention of someone doing their job. He was watching her the way someone watches a variable they're keeping track of. His eyes moved to the console when she glanced toward him. A half-second delay that was just slightly off the rhythm of normal behavior. Emily looked away, shot the 500-yard sequence, moved to the 600. The wind off the ridge was doing something complicated. At the far end of the range, she could see the grass, telltales, at the downrange position, bending at different angles than the ones at mid-range, which meant a crosswind shift somewhere in the terminal portion of the flight path. She adjusted for it, held the correction, broke the shot. The steel rang. The record showed a miss. She wrote it down. At the lunch break, she sat at one of the outdoor tables with a sandwich she'd brought from the motel and watched the scoreboard update. Standings were predictable in ways that bothered her. Logan Pierce was first overall with scores that had maintained a suspicious consistency through 4 stages. The 2 top competitors from the Eastern and Western regional brackets, both of whom she had watched shoot with genuine precision, were 5th and 8th. Not poor performances, but underperformances relative to what she had seen them actually do on the stages. Sandrickson Swan sat down across from her with a plastic bottle of water and the expression of someone who had been carrying a thought for a while and had decided to put it down. "Keeping a log?" Sandra said. Emily looked at her. Kwan was mid-30s, direct, with the economical body language of someone who had spent 15 years in law enforcement and learned to say what she meant. "What makes you ask that?" "Because I am," Sandra said. "And because I've seen you looking at the steel after your shots, and I've been doing the same thing." He set the water bottle down. "I had 4 recorded misses in stages 2 and 3 combined. I know I didn't miss 4 shots." Emily ate a piece of her sandwich. Thought for a moment. "Don't file anything today," she said. Sandra looked at her. "Tomorrow," Emily said. "Or the day after." "But not today. You know something. I'm working on knowing something." She met Sandra's eyes. "Can you do me a favor and not push on this until I tell you it's time?" Sandra was quiet. She had the stillness of someone who had processed a great deal of situations where patience was the correct tool and impatience was the costly one. "How long?" Sandra said. "Tonight. Maybe tomorrow morning." Sandra picked up her water bottle. "Fine." She stood. "For what it's worth, I looked up your Nevada disqualification last year." "Read the panel report." Emily waited. "There were holes in it," Sandra said. The access log timestamps didn't account for the gap between credential use and system modification. That's a basic forensic error. Either the panel missed it or they chose not to see it. She walked away. Emily finished her sandwich. Stage 5 ran in the afternoon and involved a scenario-based course, a constructed environment simulating an urban landscape with targets representing threat and non-threat positions mixed throughout. Competitors navigated the course on a timed sequence, engaging threat targets and avoiding non-threat ones, with heavy penalties for non-threat hits and time bonuses for threat neutralization under 2 seconds. It was the kind of stage Emily had trained for professionally. Not the sport version, the actual version, in actual environments, under actual conditions. She had done this work for real, and the simulation was, in some ways, easier than the memory made it feel, because the targets here stayed still and didn't carry weapons, and the worst thing that happened if you made a mistake was a point penalty. She moved through the course efficiently, made 2 decisions she second-guessed mid-execution. 1 threat target in a partially obscured position she hesitated on for nearly 3 seconds before engaging, and 1 non-threat in a doorway that briefly registered as a threat at her first sight picture before she corrected. Both recoverable. She was shooting the backup rifle again, and she had, by this point, largely adapted to its trigger characteristics through the accumulated repetition of the day's stages. She finished the course with a time she was satisfied with. The recorded score dropped 2 threat neutralizations and added a non-threat penalty that hadn't happened. Stood at the exit display and breathed slowly through her nose. 3 stages. Consistent, targeted, selective score manipulation. Her real performance would have placed her in the top 4 overall. Her recorded score had her in 11th. She wrote the numbers down. After the day's stages concluded, competitors filtered back to the staging area, equipment bays, the canteen in the main building. Emily went to her bay, performed her equipment breakdown, packed her backup rifle carefully, and took her time about it. The man who had been watching her at the 400-yard station walked past the bay entrance at 5:14. He didn't look in, but he slowed fractionally as he passed. The kind of slowdown that wasn't a stop and didn't commit to anything. She noted the time in her notebook. She found Logan near the scoreboard display in the main building, looking at the standings with his coach while his camera operator got footage of the scoreboard. She hadn't planned to approach him. She stood nearby and waited to see if he'd see her. He did. He said something to his coach, and the coach moved away, and Logan walked toward her with his hands in his jacket pockets. Camera operator stayed where he was. Logan had made some kind of call about this conversation that excluded the content. That was interesting. "Good day," he said. "Sure." "You're in 11th." He said it without the smile this time. "I know where I am." He looked at her for a moment. Something behind the easy surface of his expression was doing a different kind of work. Something more careful, less performed. "Your stage 5 run looked clean," he said. "I watched from the observation fence. You didn't miss those targets." Emily held his gaze. "No," she said. "I didn't." Logan was quiet. He glanced briefly toward the control tower visible through the main building's window, then back. The glance was fast, but it was there. "You should be careful," he said. Came out low and without any of the competitive rival packaging. "About whatever you're doing, I'm not..." He stopped. "Just be careful." He walked back to a coach. Emily stood at the scoreboard and thought about what had just happened for a long time. She left the range at 6 and drove to the motel and sat in the parking lot with the engine running for 10 minutes before going inside. She ate a gas station meal she bought on the way, a wrapped sandwich and a bottle of water and a bag of pretzels she didn't finish, and sat at the small desk in her room with her notebook open and her phone in her hand. She had 2 options with the phone. She could call someone now. Law enforcement, federal contact, someone outside this situation, who could take the information she currently had and begin a process. What she currently had was within her own documentation of scoring discrepancies, a memory card with partial footage and ambiguous audio, and a technician who had spoken to her off the record. Or she could wait until tonight and come out of Building 3 with the complete archived logs. In which case she would have something that could actually move a federal fraud investigation from preliminary to actionable. She thought about the text message. "We know what you found." She thought about the man who had slowed at her bay entrance. She thought about Derek Vaughn's daughter on a playground. She put the phone down. At 8:30, she changed into dark clothes, packed the memory card into the inner pocket of her vest, pulled a light jacket over it, and drove back toward Blackridge with her headlights cutting through the full dark of the desert highway. She parked a quarter-mile from the main gate, off the road behind a stand of scrub and rock, and walked the remaining distance on foot. The night air was cold now, the day's heat fully gone, the sky above clear and enormous the way it only got in places far enough from city light to actually be dark. The main gate was closed and attended. She went around the south perimeter to the side access, a maintenance entrance she had identified during the day, a chain-link gate secured with a padlock that, according to what she could see, was keyed differently from the main gate hardware. She had a bypass tool in her kit that handled standard padlock formats. It took her 90 seconds. Building 3 was the infrastructure cluster at the back of the range server room, equipment storage, the technical backbone of the electronic scoring network. She moved across the open ground between the perimeter and the building, using the shadow lines from the range structures, keeping low, keeping slow, taking her time. The side door was unlatched, as Derek had said it would be. She pushed it open and went inside. The server room was at the end of a short corridor, behind a reinforced door with a keypad lock. The corridor was lit by emergency lighting strips along the floor, dim amber, enough to navigate by. Derek was not in the corridor. She went to the server room door, looked at the keypad. She didn't have the code she had assumed Derek would be here. Pressed her ear against the door. Voices, 2 of them. One was Derek. The other was not a voice she recognized. Couldn't make out words through the door. She could make out the shape of the conversation, the pace, the tension in it, the quality of Derek's responses, which were short and came with long pauses before them. Put her hand on the door handle. The keypad beside the door displayed a green light. It was already unlocked. She opened the door. Derek Vaughn was on the floor beside the server rack, not moving. Blood on the concrete under his head, a dark spreading pool that reflected the overhead fluorescent light in a way that made her stomach contract. His eyes were closed. His chest was moving. She checked that first, crossed the room in 4 steps, and checked that first. Breathing. Shallow and slow, but breathing. She did a fast check of the room. Empty. The server rack to her left was active, the terminals running, the archive drives blinking. Whatever process Derek had started, before whatever had happened, the system was still running. She grabbed Derek's access badge from his belt clip. Found the terminal he had been working at, judging by the open interface on the nearest screen. The archive pull was 73% complete. She sat down in front of the terminal. Above her, somewhere in the building, a door opened. Footsteps in the corridor. More than one set. Emily looked at the progress bar on the screen. 78%. The footsteps stopped outside the server room door. She looked at the door. Looked at the screen. 81%. The handle turned, and Emily did not move from the terminal. 83%. The door opened inward, and 2 men came through it fast, not running, but moving with the compressed urgency of people who had a job to do and had decided the time for being indirect about it was finished. The first was the man who had watched her at the 400-yard station. Up close, he was broader than he'd looked at distance, with a flat, functional face and the kind of physical economy that came from professional training rather than gym work. The second was younger, with a radio clipped to his vest, and his hand resting near a sidearm retention in a retention holster. They stopped when they saw her at the terminal, not surprise, exactly. More like a rapid recalculation. Step away from the console, the first man said. Emily looked at the screen. 86%. Step away from the console right now. Give me 40 seconds, she said. He crossed the room in 3 steps and grabbed her by the upper arm and pulled her out of the chair. She let him pull. She'd already seen the sidearm on the second man, and the math on resistance was straightforward. Came up out of the chair without fighting it, and he rotated her away from the terminal and pushed her toward the wall. Don't touch the system, he said to the second man. The download's still running, the second man said. Don't touch it. Call it in first. Emily stood against the wall with her hands raised to mid-chest height and looked at Derek on the floor. The pool of blood under his head had spread another few inches. His breathing was still visible in the rise and fall of his jacket. He needs a medic, she said. He'll get one, the first man said. He wasn't looking at Derek. He was looking at her with the assessing attention of someone taking inventory. Where's the card? What card? He looked at her vest. At the zipper on the interior pocket. She didn't move. He reached forward and unzipped it himself and took the memory card out and held it between 2 fingers. This, he said. She said nothing. He handed the card to the second man, who was on his radio now, speaking in a low voice. She could mostly make out Building 3, server room. We have Carter. Vaughn is down. The archive pull is still active. We need direction, and then a pause, and then the second man looked up. He wants to know the percentage, the second man said. The first man checked the screen. 91, he said. Another pause on the radio. He says, kill it, the second man said. The first man went to the terminal. He looked at the interface for a moment, not a long moment, just enough to find the right input, and then he canceled the download. Progress bar disappeared. The screen returned to its baseline state. Emily watched this happen. 91%, 9% short. She did not let herself calculate what that 9% might or might not contain. What? Not yet. There was no productive use for that calculation right now. Sit down, the first man said. He pointed at the chair she'd been pulled out of. She sat. Give me your phone. She took it from her jacket pocket and handed it over. He checked it, looked at the screen, checked the recent calls, checked the messages. She watched him find the unknown number text from the previous night. He showed it to the second man without comment. Then he put the phone in his own jacket pocket. Is there a copy of what was on the card? He said. No. Files on the laptop at your motel. The card reader and some stage diagrams. That's all? That's all. He looked at her for a moment. Deciding how much he believed her, she thought, and also deciding how much it mattered whether he believed her, given what his next steps were going to be, regardless. You're going to stay here until Director Hale comes down, he said. Don't touch anything. Don't move from that chair. Vaughn needs medical attention now, Emily said. Whatever else is happening, he's got a head injury, and he's been unconscious for at least 10 minutes. Clock. The first man looked at Derek. Something moved in his expression, not softness, but a kind of practical acknowledgement. Call a medic, he said to the second man. Stage it outside. Not in here. The second man went out. The first man stayed, standing between Emily and the door, with his hand not quite resting on his sidearm, but positioned close enough to it that the communication was clear. The server room was quiet, except for the hum of the equipment racks, and Derek's slow, shallow breathing. Emily sat in the chair and looked at the floor and thought. Hale arrived 11 minutes later. She heard him in the corridor before the door opened his voice, speaking to someone she couldn't see, the measured cadence of a man who moved through situations at a pace he set himself. She had heard that voice in a formal proceeding 3 years ago, and she had heard it in a brief private moment outside that proceedings room. And the combination of those memories with the audio fragment from the card, Hale. Smith finished before the final stage did something cold and clarifying to her thinking. The door opened. Marcus Hale was 61 years old, silver-haired, with the upright posture of a former military officer and the composed, authoritative bearing of a man who had spent decades being the most senior person in whatever room he entered. He wore a dark jacket over a collared shirt, no tie. He looked at Derek on the floor, then at Emily in the chair, then at the first man standing to her left, with the unhurried assessment of someone processing an unpleasant but manageable situation. "Emily," he said. She looked at him. He pulled a folding chair from against the wall, positioned it a few feet in front of her, and sat down. Deliberate, unhurried, like they were about to have a meeting. "You've been busy," he said. "Vaughn needs a hospital," she said. "He's been on the floor he'll be transported when it's appropriate to do so." Hale glanced at the first man. "Where are we on containment?" "Card secured. Download was terminated at 91%. We're running a check on her motel room now." Hale nodded. He looked back at Emily. "The card contents," he said. "How much did you review?" "Enough," specifically. 3 intact files. Security footage fragment from Nevada. Audio recording. Partial staff ID from the badge footage. She held his gaze. "The audio mentions you by name." Hale's expression didn't change. He had the kind of face that had been trained out of involuntary reactions, not blank, but controlled. The expression of a man who had decided long ago that his face was a professional instrument and treated it accordingly. "That recording is fragmentary and without context," he said. "It proves nothing. The Nevada scoring logs would." The download was terminated. 91%, she said. A small pause. "What's in the remaining 9%? She said. Hale looked at her steadily. "Nothing that concerns you." "Then you wouldn't have canceled it." He was quiet for a moment. She could see him making a decision, not about what to do with her, she thought. That decision had probably been substantially made before he walked in the door, but about how to frame the conversation he was about to have. "You're a remarkable shooter," he said. "You were 3 years ago, and you still are. What happened in Nevada was a professional necessity, not a personal judgment. You had identified an irregularity in the scoring data during Stage 3, and you were going to report it. We couldn't allow that at that stage of the project. So you destroyed my career. We redirected your trajectory," he said, and he said it with the calm of someone who had revised this language many times. "The disqualification was a contained solution to a specific problem." Emily looked at him. "A contained solution," she said. "The work being done through this platform has national security applications that outwhip—" "Don't," she said it flat. "Don't give me the national security architecture. You were running a covert data collection operation through a civilian sporting event, using falsified disqualifications to silence anyone who notices. That's not national security. That's fraud, and it's assault. And whatever happened to Derek Vaughn tonight is something considerably worse." Hale was quiet. "Vaughn made choices," he said finally. "He was trying to do the right thing. He was interfering with a program that has been running for 5 years, Emily said. "Across at least 4 championships. How many disqualifications? How many careers?" Hale didn't answer. "How many people got the photograph?" she said. "The one of someone they loved. How many people saw that and decided to stay quiet?" First man shifted his weight behind her. Hale's eyes moved to him briefly. A small check, then back to Emily. "This conversation is over," Hale said. He stood. "You're going to be detained until the competition concludes tomorrow. After that, the situation will be assessed and appropriate steps will be taken." He straightened his jacket. "I'd encourage you to think carefully about the position you're in, Emily. Evidence you've collected is in our possession. The only witness to the archive data is unconscious. Your scores in this competition, as recorded, place you in 11th place. You have no credibility advantage here." He moved toward the door. "Scorings logs from tonight's partial download," Emily said. "How much of the Nevada data was in the first 91%? Hale stopped. He didn't turn around immediately. When he did, the composure was fully intact, but something had shifted behind it, a hairline adjustment in the set of his jaw. "What?" he said. "I'm asking because the archive was structured chronologically. Nevada was the oldest record set, which means it was first in the queue." She met his eyes. 91% of a chronologically ordered archive would include the complete Nevada logs. All of them, unmodified originals. The server room was completely silent. "The download was canceled," Hale said. "The progress was canceled," Emily said. "The data that had already transferred to the buffer drive was not." She watched his face. "There is no buffer drive," the first man said, from behind her. "The archive terminal uses a write buffer cache as a standard data integrity measure," Emily said. "Part of the base installation on this hardware configuration." "Derek told me that." She paused. "The buffer retains transferred data for 72 hours unless manually purged. Canceling the download process doesn't touch it." This was a partial truth wrapped around a complete fabrication. Derek had told her no such thing. She did not know whether a buffer cache existed on this specific system. She was working with a technical concept that was real in general terms and applying it to a specific situation she had no confirmation of, watching two men decide whether they believed her. And the gap between what she actually knew and what she was claiming to know was a gap she could not afford to have them close. Hale looked at the first man. The first man looked at the terminal. He went to it and worked the interface for a moment. Emily watched his back. His shoulders changed a very small shift, but she saw it. Turned. "There's a cache partition," he said. "I can't tell the current state without a diagnostic tool. I'd need to get Riser in here." Hale's composure had not broken, but it had stretched. "Get Riser," he said. The first man went out. Hale looked at Emily. "Even if what you're describing were accurate," he said, "the data in a hardware cache is not accessible without the terminal credentials, which you don't have." "Derek's badge is still in this room," she said. "You didn't take it when you took my phone." Hale's eyes moved to Derek on the floor, to the badge clip on his belt, back to Emily. The badge was not on Derek's belt clip. Emily had taken it before the first man grabbed her and palmed it in the quarter second between standing from the chair and being rotated toward the wall, and it was now in her right hand, held flat against her palm, which was resting on her knee with her fingers loosely curved downward. Hale did not know whether she had the badge or was bluffing. She did not tell him. She sat very still and held his gaze and let the uncertainty do what uncertainty did to people who needed certainty to make their next move. The medic arrived at 10:22, and the argument about whether Derek would be transported immediately or staged outside became moot when the medic took one look at the blood pool and the pupillary response and said, flatly and without any interest in the politics of the room, that this man needed to go to a trauma center in the next 30 minutes, or the converse significantly about what happened to him was going to become significantly more serious for everyone involved. Hale authorized the transport. He didn't have a good alternative. 2 EMTs came in with a stretcher. Emily watched them work the collar, the board, the careful lateral transfer, the IV line going in before they moved him. She watched Derek's face when they moved him, still unconscious. The blood on the floor stayed after he was gone, a dark, irregular shape on the concrete. The room felt different without him in it. Hale positioned a second man inside the server room, a new face, older, with a technical vest and the focused look of someone who worked with systems, and stepped out into the corridor with the first man pulling the door most of the way closed. Not all the way. Emily could hear fragments. She used the time. Derek's access badge was in her right palm. She kept her hands in her lap, her body still, her breathing normal, and worked the badge slowly into the interior pocket of her vest without moving her upper arms or shoulders in any way that would be visible from the door gap or the room's one camera, a fixed position unit in the upper corner above the door, covering the room entrance and the main floor space. camera angle did not cover the chair she was sitting in. She had noticed that when she first came in. Old habit. She always noticed cameras. The technical man was examining the terminal, pulling up interface menus with the focused attention of someone running a diagnostic. He hadn't spoken to her. She didn't speak to him. She watched him work and thought about what she had and what she needed, and what the distance was between those two things. What she had, Derek's badge, which she didn't know whether would access the cache partition, even if the cache partition existed. The partial memory card contents she'd reviewed at the motel fragmented, but in her head, including the staff ID number and the audio transcript she'd written verbatim in her notebook, which was in her jacket pocket. Her notebook was also in her jacket pocket. They had taken her phone. They had not searched her jacket. What she needed, a way out of this room, a way to transmit what she had to someone who could act on it before Hale locked down whatever he was planning to lock down, and enough time to do both. Corridor went quiet. She didn't know where Hale had gone. The technical man said, without turning from the terminal, "There's no active cache partition on this system." Emily said nothing. "Whatever you told him," the technical man said, "there's no buffer cache. The architecture doesn't support it on this installation." He turned and looked at her. He had an angular face and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the expression of someone who found the situation more professionally irritating than personally alarming. "You bought yourself about 15 minutes, he said. "That's all. Long enough," Emily said. He frowned. "For what?" The fire alarm went off. She had not set the fire alarm. She didn't know who had. She didn't stop to work it out. The alarm was loud and immediate, the full building system, strobes and klaxon, the particular urgent cacophony of an institutional fire alarm that was designed to move people, and did move people, including the technical man who came up out of his chair with a startled curse and looked at the ceiling and then at the door. Emily was already moving. She crossed the room in 4 steps, hit the door with her shoulder, and came out into the corridor at a controlled run. Corridor was empty. Hale and the first man were not there. Emergency lighting had kicked in alongside the alarm, red-white strobes at intervals along the ceiling that turned the narrow space into something disorienting. She went left, not back toward the side door she'd entered through. That was the obvious route, and obvious routes were for situations where no one was looking for you. She went deeper into the building, through a door at the far end of the corridor that opened into a maintenance passage, concrete block walls and overhead pipe runs, a service corridor that connected the infrastructure buildings along the range's back perimeter. She ran. Not panic running, measured, controlled, the kind of pace that covered ground without destroying your ability to think and respond when thinking and responding became necessary. She had run in worse conditions, carrying more weight, with people actively trying to locate her. And the memory of having done it was useful, even when the specific circumstances were different. The maintenance passage ran for approximately 60 yards, before it intersected with a cross corridor. She stopped at the intersection and listened past the alarm. Voices to her right, 2 of them, moving, radio traffic audible. She went left. A door at the end opened onto the exterior of the range, the back perimeter, a concrete apron between the buildings and the chain-link fence. She came out into cold air and the screaming alarm and looked left and right. Clear. She moved along the building wall, staying in the shadow, heading south toward the main range area. She needed a radio. She needed a communication system that reached everyone on the range, simultaneously all the competitors, the judges, the staff, the journalists who covered the competition. She needed the kind of broadcast that couldn't be quietly retracted. The control tower was 200 yards across open ground. The championship was also equipped with a range-wide public address system. She had heard it, used for stage announcements and schedule updates throughout the competition. The PA control point was in the tower on the second level, but there was a secondary input station at the main equipment building. She had seen it during her initial survey of the complex. On the first morning, a wall-mounted rack unit, a desk-style interface, a handset, and a selector switch that fed the main PA speakers distributed across the range. Equipment building was 80 yards to her east. She ran. The fire alarm was still running. It would bring people out of buildings, which meant more people in the open, which meant more cover and more chaos, and a harder environment for 2 or 3 men to manage the movement of one specific person they needed to contain. She crossed the open ground between the building and the equipment storage area in 18 seconds, moving fast and low, and came around the corner of the equipment building into the concrete alcove where the secondary PA station was mounted. The interface was exactly where she'd noted it. She had the handset in her hand before she fully processed, having reached for it. The selector switch had 4 positions. She had watched a range official use this unit on the first morning. She remembered which position opened the full complex broadcast. She set the selector, checked the power indicator. Green. She pressed transmit. Her voice went out across Blackridge Shooting Complex, through every speaker on the range in the main building, in the staging area, in the canteen, in the tower, in the covered observer positions, in the open stage areas, in the equipment bays, and every other space where a speaker had been installed. My name is Emily Carter. I'm a competitor in the national championship. What I'm about to tell you is being recorded and transmitted to federal law enforcement contacts outside this facility. That last part was also a fabrication. She had no recording equipment. She had no current contact with anyone outside the facility. But the people she needed to worry about didn't know that, and by the time they confirmed it, she intended to be further along. The electronic scoring system at this range has been used to systematically falsify competition results across multiple national championships. The operation is run by Championship Director Marcus Hale in coordination with the defense contractor Harlan Systems. Competitors have been disqualified, scores have been altered, and witnesses have been physically assaulted to suppress evidence of the operation. She paused for breath. The range technician Derek Vaughn has been assaulted tonight and transported to a trauma center. He has documentation of the falsified scoring logs from the Nevada competition 3 years ago, and from this championship. That documentation is in federal hands. Another fabrication. Partial. She was working with what she had. Every judge, every official, every journalist at this facility, this is being recorded. What happens in the next 10 minutes will be on record. I'm asking you to bear witness. She released the transmit button. The range was loud with the fire alarm, and then, cutting through it, she heard another sound people. Voices, movement. The particular noise of a large group of people processing something unexpected. The way a crowd sounds when the thing they're hearing doesn't fit the category they were prepared for. She sets the handset down. She turned. Marcus Hale was standing at the corner of the equipment building 20 feet away, and he was not alone. The first man was behind him and to the left. A third man she hadn't seen before was to the right. All 3 of them were looking at her with the particular stillness of people who have just heard something they cannot unhear and are now making fast calculations about what comes next. Hale's composure had not fully broken, but it had cracked. She could see it in the tension around his eyes and the set of his jaw and the way he was breathing, shallow, controlled, the involuntary respiratory response to a situation that had just moved significantly outside the plan. That was a mistake, he said. Probably, Emily said. But it's done. She held Derek's access badge in her right hand, had it out now, visible, no longer any reason to conceal it. The cache partition, she said. Whatever your technician told you about the architecture, he's right that the standard system doesn't have one. But Derek modified this installation 8 months ago when he found the Nevada logs. He told me about it the first time we talked. She held up the badge. He added a secondary encrypted partition, accessible only by his credentials. The 91% that transferred before you canceled the download went to that partition. All of it, including the complete Nevada archive. This was a lie, a constructed, load-bearing lie built on the framework of the partial truth she'd told earlier, and the specific knowledge that she had Derek's badge, and Hale did not know for certain what Derek had or hadn't done to his own system in the months he'd been carrying the logs. She watched Hale decide whether it was true. The three of them moved. Emily ran, not toward the perimeter that was what they would anticipate. She went toward the range, toward the active competition area, toward the one place on the complex where there were guaranteed to be people who had just heard her broadcast and who were not in Hale's pocket. Came through the gate onto the main firing line at full speed and nearly ran directly into Sandra Kwan, who was standing at the line entrance with three other competitors, all of them looking toward the equipment building from which Emily had just come. Sandra grabbed her arm. "What the hell is?" "Hale," Emily said. "Behind me. 3 men." Sandra looked past her. "Are you—" "I'm fine. Derek Vaughn isn't." Emily was breathing hard. PA broadcast. "How many people heard it?" "Everyone," Sandra said. "The whole range. Every speaker in the complex." "Journalists?" 2 from the broadcast network. They were setting up for tomorrow's finals when the alarm went off. Sandra's eyes were sharp and fast. "What do you need?" Emily looked at the main building. Through the windows she could see people, competitors, staff, the white polo shirts of competition officials. Movement. The noise of a crowd that had heard something and was deciding what to do about it. She looked at the gate behind her. Hale had stopped at the gate. All 3 of them had stopped. They were standing there, outside the firing line perimeter, and she understood why they were calculating the audience. The broadcast had changed the equation. Coming onto the range floor to physically remove or detain her, with 40-plus witnesses and 2 journalists with cameras, was a different action than it had been 60 seconds ago. Hale was looking at her across 60 feet of open range. She looked back at him. Then she took the notebook from her jacket pocket and found the page where she had transcribed the audio recording verbatim. Staff ID number, the access timestamps, 3 pages of documented scoring discrepancies with stage, position, recorded score, and observed physical evidence noted for each. She handed it to Sandra. "Read it," she said, out loud, to whoever's close enough to hear. Sandra looked at the notebook. Looked at Emily. "Now," she said. Right now, Sandra opened the notebook. She started reading. Her voice was clear and carried well in the open range air, and the people nearby went quiet to hear it. And the people further away moved closer, and the 2 journalists from the broadcast network came through the main building door with their cameras and pointed them at the growing crowd at the firing line. Emily stood at the edge of the group and breathed. She looked at the gate. Hale was gone. The first man was gone. The third man was gone. The gate was empty. And the desert beyond, it was dark. And she didn't know where they had gone or how much time she had before they reorganized and came back differently. But she knew the next 10 minutes mattered more than anything she had shot at in 3 years of rebuilding. And she stayed exactly where she was and watched Sandra read and listened to the crowd go quiet around the words. And for the first time in a very long time, the particular stillness of a situation that had stopped being something done to her and started being something she was doing. The fire alarm cut off. In the sudden silence, Sandra's voice was very clear, and every word landed. Sandra read for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Emily counted because counting was something to do while she stood at the edge of the crowd and watched faces and watched the gate and watched the 2 journalists who had stopped pretending to be neutral observers and were now simply recording. Everything with the focused attention of people who understood they were standing in the middle of something that was going to matter. The crowd around Sandra had grown. Competitors, range staff, competition officials, the canteen workers who had come out when the fire alarm sounded and hadn't gone back in. Maybe 40 people total, standing in the cold desert air under the range lights, with their breath visible and their faces doing the complicated work of processing information that rearranged what they thought they knew about where they were and what they had been participating in. Sandra read the scoring discrepancies first, stage by stage, position by position, recorded score against observed physical evidence. Her voice was level and precise, the voice of someone who had given testimony before and understood what made testimony credible. She didn't editorialize. She read what was written. When she got to the staff ID number and the Nevada timestamps, one of the competition officials, a heavy-set man in his 50s named Garrett, who had been the chief range officer for the championship's eastern bracket, said something under his breath and took 3 steps back from the group and stood apart from everyone else, with his arms crossed and his jaw working. Emily watched him. He wasn't surprised. He was recalibrating, which was different. She filed that. When Sandra finished, the silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then everyone started talking at once. Emily didn't participate. She moved through the edge of the crowd toward the main building, scanning the perimeter as she walked. The gate where Hale had stood was still empty. The maintenance corridor door on the back of the infrastructure building was closed. No visible movement in the shadows beyond the range lights. He was somewhere on this complex. He hadn't had time to reach the main gate and get a vehicle out before the crowd assembled. She knew that because she had been watching the main gate from the firing line and no vehicle had moved. He was waiting for something, reorganizing, deciding what version of this situation was still recoverable. She pushed through the main building door. The building's interior was half empty. Most people had gone outside when the alarm sounded and hadn't fully returned. The reception area and the corridor leading to the administrative offices were lit and quiet. She went to the administrative section, past the scoring coordination room, to the small office at the end of the hall marked Championship Administration. The door was unlocked. She went in, sat down at the desk, and picked up the landline phone. Her cell was still in the first man's jacket pocket somewhere out in the desert night. The landline was a direct outside line. She could see the indicator on the handset. She dialed the number she had memorized from Derek's information inspection 6 weeks prior, Phoenix office of the Federal Marshal Service, the number Derek had used to make anonymous contact with an agent named Teller. Rang 4 times. Phoenix Federal Marshal, duty desk. I need to speak to Marshal Teller. This is urgent, and it's related to the Blackridge contact from 6 weeks ago. Pause. Hold, she held. 40 seconds. A minute. This is Teller. He sounded like he'd been asleep, which he probably had been. It was past 11 at night. His voice was rough at the edges, but sharpened fast, the way trained people's voices sharpened when the content of what they were hearing overrode the inconvenience of the hour. She talked for 7 minutes. She laid it out in order: the scoring operation, Harlan Systems, Hale's role, the Nevada disqualification, the memory card contents, the assault on Derek Vaughn, the server room, the PA broadcast, the journalists, the notebook. She was precise. She did not editorialize, and she did not speculate beyond what she had direct evidence for. When she finished, she waited. The technician, Teller said. Vaughn. He's been transported to a trauma center? Tucson Regional, I believe. That's the closest trauma center to this location. And the archive data. You're saying it may exist in a hardware partition on the server room terminal. I said that publicly. I don't know for certain whether the partition exists or whether Derek created it. I said it to create uncertainty for Hale and buy time. Pause. You lied to a federal you didn't know I was... He stopped. Okay. And the notebook. Physical documentation. In your possession. Yes. Where are you right now? Administrative office in the main competition building at Blackridge. I don't know where Hale is on the property. Stay in that building. Don't go back outside alone. His voice was fully sharp now. I'm going to make some calls. This is going to take me a few hours to assemble properly. I can have a team at your location by 4:30 at the earliest. Hale will be gone by 4, maybe. But if what you're describing is accurate, he won't be able to go far enough. I've got the Harlan Systems flag on my board. There's an existing investigation. I can't tell you more than that, but this isn't coming out of nowhere for us. Emily processed that. The anonymous contact 6 weeks ago, she said. Derek's contact was not the first piece of information we'd received on this, Teller said carefully. That's all I can tell you. Stay in the building. Keep the journalists close. Don't let Hale or anyone associated with him access the server room terminal before we arrive. I don't have the authority to. You've got a crowd of witnesses and 2 cameras and a PA system, Teller said. Use them. I'll be there by 4. He ended the call. Emily set the handset down. She sat in Hale's administrative chair in Hale's administrative office and looked at the desk, the neat stacks of competition documentation, the branded championship folders, the framed photograph on the corner of the desk showing Hale at some prior year's awards ceremony, shaking hands with a man in military dress uniform she didn't recognize. She looked at the photograph for a moment. Then she picked it up and put it face down on the desk and went back out into the building. Sandra was inside by the time Emily returned to the main area, along with a cluster of competitors and 2 competition officials who were having a conversation that had the pressured, overlapping quality of people, trying to establish shared ground quickly. One of the journalists, a woman in her 30s with a broadcast network lanyard and a camera operator at her shoulder, intercepted Emily before she reached the group. Emily Carter, the journalist said. It wasn't a question. Nadia Reyes, Western Tactical Network. Can you speak with me? Not right now. The broadcast you made, I know what I said. Emily moved past her. Give me 20 minutes. She reached Sandra and pulled her aside. Federal Marshal is coming, Emily said. 4 a.m. at the earliest. Sandra absorbed this. Hale? Still on the property, I think. I need eyes on the server room building. Quan. The voice came from behind Emily. She turned. Tapper, the former Marine she'd cataloged on the first day, was standing with his arms at his sides, and his expression arranged in the settled, neutral way of someone who had decided something and was reporting it rather than proposing it. He was not a small man. He had a stillness that came from the same place Emily's did. I heard the broadcast, he said to Emily. I watched you come off the range. He paused. What do you need? She looked at him for a moment. Server room in Building 3, she said. I need to know if anyone goes in or comes out before 4A. That's it? That's it. He nodded once and walked out. Sandra watched him go. He's going to stand outside a building in the dark for 5 hours. Yes, Emily said. Because you asked him to. Because he made a decision, Emily said. There's a difference. The next 2 hours were the particular, exhausting chaos of a situation that had detonated publicly and was now in the process of everyone deciding what role they had played in it and what role they were going to claim going forward. The competition officials, split 3 of them, retreated to the administrative corridor and closed the door and made calls. Emily wasn't party to, and 2 others, including the chief judge for the Western bracket, a woman named Patricia Osei, who had been running competition oversight for 9 years, came to Emily directly. Osei was 60, compact, with close-cropped gray hair and the manner of someone who had spent decades managing situations where the rules and the reality had stopped matching and had developed a functional approach to that gap. I need to understand what you have, Osei said. Specifically, not the broadcast version. What do you actually have in your hands right now? Emily laid it out, the notebook. The memory card fragments described precisely what the 3 intact files contained, what was visible, what was inferable, and what wasn't. Audio transcript, the staff ID, the conversation with Derek Vaughn, including his description of the archived logs and the 6 months he'd spent not reporting them, and why. The text message from the unknown number. Osei listened without interrupting. She had a legal pad and she wrote notes in a compressed, efficient hand. When Emily finished, Osei looked at her notes. The memory card is in the possession of Hale's people, she said. Yes. Your phone is with them as well. Yes. The notebook is your only physical evidence in hand. The notebook and whatever is or isn't in the server room terminal's archive partition, which you told Hale exists, and you told the marshal it may not. Correct. Osei looked at her steadily, not with judgment exactly, with the focused attention of someone running a legal assessment on the fly. Scoring discrepancy documentation in the notebook, she said. Your observations versus recorded scores. That's your personal account. It's supported by your observation, but it's not independently verified. Sandra Kwan has her own discrepancies. I expect other competitors do too. Still competitor testimony. Interested parties. I know, Emily said. It's not a clean case. It's what I have. Osei tapped her pen against the legal pad twice, looked at the ceiling, looked back. The Nevada disqualification panel, she said. I was not on that panel. I want to be clear about that. I know. I looked up the panel composition. I reviewed the panel report afterward. At the time, I thought the credential access logs were presented as definitive. I didn't have a basis to question the panel's technical findings. She paused. I'm telling you that because I think you deserve to know where I stood. Emily held her gaze. Where do you stand now? She said. Osei set her pen down. I'm going to pull every scoring record from this championship, she said. Raw stage data, sensor logs, everything the officials have access to. I'll do it myself tonight from the judge's access terminal in the coordination room. Hale doesn't have authority over the judge's system it runs on a separate credentialing structure. She paused, and I'm going to call the NTSA's general counsel. Tonight, he'll scream at me for waking him up, and then he'll tell me what the legal exposure is, and then we'll all be in the same very complicated position together. It wasn't everything. Emily recognized that. But it was Osei committing to something real in her own language, on her own terms, without being pushed into it, which meant she would actually do it. Thank you, Emily said. Don't thank me yet, Osei said. The server room data doesn't materialize. Scoring discrepancies are going to be characterized as competitive grievances, and Hale's lawyers are going to build a very elegant story about a disgraced competitor making allegations under pressure. She stood. Find me something solid before 4 a.m. She went toward the coordination room. At 1:15 in the morning, Logan Pierce found Emily in the corridor outside the administrative offices. She heard him coming his boots on the linoleum, a specific rhythm she had apparently learned without meaning to over 3 days of being in the same spaces as him. He came around the corner and stopped when he saw her, and the thing that had been almost visible behind his face during their brief exchange at the scoreboard earlier was now fully present, not the performed ease, not the sponsor-friendly accessibility. Something underneath those things that was considerably less comfortable. He looked tired. Not the superficial tired of a long day tired in the way of someone who had been carrying something heavy for longer than a day. I need to tell you something, he said. Okay. He looked at the corridor around them. Empty the scoring, he said. My scores. Emily waited. I didn't know at first, he said. The first year I competed under this system, I assumed I was performing the way my scores said. You do. You work hard, and the numbers reflect the work, and you don't question it. He stopped, jaw working. But last year, the federal bracket qualifier, I had a bad stage. I knew I had a bad stage, and my score didn't show it. He looked at the wall, pulled the stage footage from my own camera system, compared what my operator had shot from the observation deck against the recorded scores. There were 8 discrepancies. Emily held very still. You knew for a year, she said. I knew something was wrong for a year. His voice was tight. That's not the same as knowing what it was, or knowing what to do about it, or... He stopped. Yes, I knew. And I didn't report it, and I kept competing, and I kept winning, and I told myself I was going to figure out the right way to handle it. He looked at her now. There isn't a right way to handle it. I know that. I knew that 8 months ago. He shook his head. Emily looked at him, at the authentic misery of someone who had done a thing they couldn't undo and was standing in front of the person most damaged by the doing of it. Did Hale approach you? She said. No, I don't think he needed to. My scores were good. I asked the right questions. He paused. Came to me 6 months ago. Said there had been some data concerns with the system. Said it was being addressed. Said I should not discuss any scoring anomalies I might have observed. He made it sound routine, technical, and you let him. And I let him. No defense in it. Just the flat acknowledgement. She looked at him for a long moment. I need you to write that down, she said. Everything you just told me. The qualifier, the stage footage, the 8 discrepancies, Hale's conversation with you. Write it down tonight, sign and date it, and give it to Patricia Osei. She paused. And give it to the marshal when he arrives at 4. I'll lose my record, Logan said. Yes. Everything I've won in the last 3 years goes under review. Yes. He nodded slowly. He'd known that when he came to find her, she thought. This wasn't a negotiation. He was reporting for a consequence he'd already accepted. Your stage 5 run yesterday, he said. I watched it. I want you to know I called it correctly in my own notes. You didn't miss those targets. I know I didn't. He stopped. I wanted to say it out loud. To you directly. She held his gaze for a moment. Write it down, she said. All of it. He nodded and walked away. At 2:40 in the morning, Emily's world narrowed to a single radio call. Tapper's voice came through the range communication handset she'd borrowed from the equipment marshal, a short-range unit, enough to reach the server room building from the main structure. Someone just went in the side door, Tapper said. One individual. I couldn't get a clear ID. Emily was already moving. Stay on the door, she said. Don't go in. She went through the main building's rear exit and crossed the maintenance ground at a run, the cold air hitting her face, the range lights cutting hard shadows across the pale concrete. Came around the south side of Building 3 and found Tapper against the wall beside the side doors, standing with the particular alert stillness of someone doing close surveillance in the dark. How long, she said. 3 minutes. She looked at the door, looked at Tapper. Federal Marshal is an hour out, she said. Minimum. He read what she wasn't saying. You want to go in. Whoever is in there, if they're pulling the terminal or destroying the drive partition, we lose the evidence. If Hale's people are in there, I know what the risk is. Tapper looked at the door. Looked at her. I'll go first, he said. No, Emily said. I go first. You stay behind me and watch the room. If there are more than one, you handle the second. He didn't argue. She appreciated that. She tried the door handle. Unlocked, still unlatched from when Derek had left it open. She pushed it open slowly, the corridor beyond, lit by the emergency strip lighting she'd navigated before, and went in. Corridor was empty. The server room door at the end was closed. She went to it, pressed her ear against it, heard nothing. She tried the handle, locked. The keypad showed red. She looked at it. Then she took Derek's access badge from her interior vest pocket, held it to the reader. The keypad went green. The door opened. Marcus Hale was at the terminal. He didn't run. He didn't raise his hands. He turned from the screen and looked at her with the expression of a man who had made his last calculation and come out the other side of it into a particular kind of stillness. He was alone. The server rack was active behind him, the drives running. Emily looked at the screen. He had not been destroying the archive. He had been copying it. A second drive, an external unit plugged into the terminal's side port, was at 63% of a transfer process. She looked at Hale. Copying your own evidence? She said. Making sure the correct version is preserved, he said. The modified version. The version that reflects the operational record, he said. He was very calm. The composure had reassembled fully, or nearly fully, because she could see, underneath it, that something had permanently shifted. The calculated ease of a man who believed he controlled the situation had been replaced by the calculated ease of a man who was managing its dissolution. The surface was similar. The foundation was different. "It's over," she said. "It's complicated," he said. "It was always complicated. The work this system produced has genuine applications that I don't want to hear the justification. Saved lives," he said. "The ballistic profiling data fed into the terminal targeting systems for the next generation of precision munitions will reduce collateral damage in theater by a measurable margin. That's not abstract. That's real people who don't die because the system is accurate enough to distinguish." "You put a photograph of a man's 12-year-old daughter on his car seat," Emily said. "Destroyed careers. You assaulted a witness tonight. None of that is a national security application." He was quiet. "Pull the drive," she said. He looked at the screen. The transfer was at 71%. "If this data is destroyed," "It's not going to be destroyed," Emily said. "It's going to be given to a federal marshal at 4A. M, along with everything else. The original unmodified archive is going to show exactly what your modified version was designed to hide. Pulling that external drive is the one thing that actually helps you tonight." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're bluffing about the partition," he said. "There is no buffer cache." "Maybe," Emily said. "Pull the drive and let's find out together." Behind her, she heard Tapper settle his weight in the doorway. Hale looked at the screen, at the drive, at Emily. He reached over and pulled the external drive from the port. The transfer canceled. He held the drive in his hand for a moment, and then he set it on top of the server rack, and he stepped back from the terminal, and he put his hands in his jacket pockets. "NTSA General Counsel will characterize this as a contractor compliance issue," he said. "Harlan Systems absorbs the fraud exposure. The championship organization demonstrates good faith cooperation with the investigation. The disqualification records are reviewed." He was looking at the wall, not at her. "Your Nevada result will be overturned. That's going to happen regardless." "I know," Emily said. "Then what do you want?" he said. He looked at her. Genuinely asked, she thought, not a strategy, not a delaying tactic, but an actual question from a man who understood that he had lost and was trying to understand the shape of what that meant. "I want Derek Vaughn's medical bills covered," she said. "In full, before any legal proceeding concludes." A pause. And I want the complete competitor list from every championship this system has been used in. Every disqualification, every score modification, every person who lost something because they noticed an irregularity." She held his gaze. "They deserve to know." Hale said nothing for a moment. "That list exists," he said. "I know it does," Emily said. "It'll come out in discovery. I'm asking you to produce it before that." Quiet. The server room hummed them. "I need to speak with counsel," he said finally. "You're going to have time to do that," she said. "Federal marshal arrives in about an hour. I'd start thinking about what you're going to say." Stepped back from the terminal and gestured toward the door. He walked past her without looking at her and into the corridor, and Tapper fell in behind him. And Emily stayed in the server room for a moment alone, with the running drives and the abandoned external unit on top of the rack, and the evidence of a 5-year operation out in its architecture around her. She looked at the terminal screen. She looked at Derek's access badge in her hand. She held the badge to the reader. The archive interface opened. She navigated to the partition directory, looked at the folder structure, found the Nevada archive at the top of the chronological list, exactly where she'd expected it, exactly where the 91% of the download would have captured it if she had been telling the truth about the buffer. She had not been telling the truth about the buffer. But Derek had, in fact, built a secondary encrypted partition. found it in the directory because it was there labeled with a system tag she wouldn't have recognized if she hadn't been looking specifically for something that didn't fit the standard directory structure. A folder named with a string of numbers rather than a title. She opened it. 47 files, all intact, time-stamped, unmodified, bearing the hash signatures of original data rather than altered records. She sat down in front of the terminal. She did not cry, because crying was not something she did in server rooms at 3 a.m, but something released in her chest with a physical quality, a long, slow pressure that had been sitting there for 3 years, which she had carried the way you carry things you have stopped noticing because they have been there long enough to feel structural. Nevada was in there. Everything was in there. She navigated to the championship's own scoring system and accessed the live competition record for the current event. She found her scores across all 5 completed stages. She looked at the raw sensor data, the unmodified record, sitting in the system beneath the edited public record like a shadow. She found her actual scores. She had been in second place. She sat with that for a moment. Then she went to the terminal's output interface and set up a fresh archive transfer to a new destination, the range's own administrative server, which was networked separately from Hale's scoring system, and which would be immediately accessible to Patricia Osi and the federal marshal when they arrived. She initiated the transfer, 100% of the archive, all of it. She set Derek's badge on top of the external drive Hale had abandoned on the rack, stood up, rolled her shoulders, and walked out of the server room into the corridor, and then out of Building 3 into the cold desert night. Tapper was standing outside with Hale. 300 yards away, headlights appeared on the access road. 2 vehicles, moving fast. Emily watched them come. Cavalry was early. She stood in the cold and watched the lights approach. And behind her, the server room completed its transfer, all 47 files and 6 years of documented evidence moving across the network to a place that Hale and his people and Harlan Systems could no longer reach. And the desert was very quiet around all of it. The way the desert was always quiet, without opinion, without mercy, without any particular interest in whether the things that happened on its surface were just or unjust. It just held them all the same. The 2 vehicles were federal. Emily knew it before they stopped the way they moved up the access road, controlled and deliberate headlights cutting straight lines through the desert dark without the hesitation of someone unfamiliar with the terrain. 2 SUVs, dark-colored government plates. They pulled up to the main gate and the lead vehicle stopped, and a man got out who was not in uniform, but moved like someone who hadn't needed a uniform to convey authority for a long time. Marshal Teller was taller than she'd expected from a phone voice. Late 40s, lean, with a weathered face that suggested he'd spent considerable professional time outdoors in conditions that weren't comfortable. He was accompanied by 4 others, 2 in tactical vests with federal markings, 2 in plain clothes, with credentials already visible on lanyards. He crossed to Emily first. "Carter," he said. "Marshall." He looked at Tapper, standing beside Hale. Looked at Hale. "Marcus Hale," he said. Not a question. Hale said nothing. Teller looked back at Emily. "The archive transfer you initiated, is it complete?" "It was running when I came out. Should be done by now." "We'll verify." He nodded to one of the plainclothes agents, who moved toward Building 3 without needing further direction. Then he looked at Hale again, and the look was brief and professional, and contained a specific quality that Emily recognized, the look of someone closing a file they had been working for a long time. "Mr. Hale," Teller said, "I'm going to need you to come with me." Hale looked at Emily. One last look, measured and complex, the kind of look that carried more than it could say out loud. Then he turned to Teller and nodded, and the 2 of them walked toward the lead vehicle. And that was, in its way, the quietest ending to the loudest night Emily had experienced in 3 years. What followed was not clean or cinematic. It was paperwork and statements and cold coffee from the main building's canteen machine and the particular institutional grind of federal process being assembled in real time by people who were thorough and unhurried in the way of those who understood that thoroughness now prevented problems later. Emily gave her statement to a female agent named Sorensen, who wrote in longhand and asked questions that circled back on themselves in ways that were clearly deliberate, checking for consistency, checking the gaps that inconsistency left. Emily answered everything directly. When she didn't know something, she said so. When something was inference rather than observation, she labeled it as inference. Sorensen wrote all of it down and asked follow-up questions on 3 specific points: the text message, the conversation with Derek Vaughn on the first morning, and the exact sequence of events in the server room. And Emily answered those 3 points twice each without varying her account, because the account was accurate, and accurate accounts didn't vary. 4:47 in the morning, Sorensen set her pen down. The external drive that Hale was copying to, she said. You said he set it on top of the server rack. Yes. And Derek Vaughn's access badge. Same location. I left both of them there. Sorensen made a note. The archive transfer you initiated to the administrative server, we've confirmed it completed. 47 files, all time-stamped, all carrying original hash signatures. She paused. The Nevada records are intact, unmodified originals. Emily held still. Complete? She said. Complete. Emily looked at the wall across the small meeting room they'd been using for the statement. The wall had a framed championship schedule on it from 3 years prior. She looked at it without reading it. Okay, she said. Sorensen looked at her with the careful attention of someone who had interviewed a lot of people in a lot of difficult circumstances and had developed a reliable read on the difference between composure and numbness. Are you all right? She said. It was a simple question. Emily had been asked it before in contexts that made it complicated, but Sorensen asked it the way people ask when they actually want to know, not as a procedural courtesy, not as a box to check, but as a direct inquiry from one person to another. Not entirely, Emily said, but I will be. Sorensen nodded. She seemed to find that answer satisfactory. 6 in the morning, the range was fully lit with actual daylight, the Arizona sun clearing the eastern ridge and laying long shadows across the competition area. Everything the range lights had made flat and artificial, now given dimension and color. Emily stood outside the main building with a cup of coffee that was better than anything she'd had in 3 days, and watched federal agents move in and out of the infrastructure buildings with equipment cases and sealed evidence bags. Patricia Ossie found her at 6:20. She looked like a woman who had not slept and had processed a great deal in the hours of not sleeping and had arrived at a position she was now ready to state. I've been on the phone with the NTSA General Counsel for most of the night, Ossie said. The organization is going to cooperate fully with the federal investigation. Been decided at the board level. She paused. The championship results from this event are suspended pending review of the raw scoring data. All of it. Every stage. How long will that take? Weeks. Possibly months. Ossie looked at her coffee cup. The investigation will also review the 4 prior championships identified in the archive. Disqualification records, score modifications, the complete list. She paused. Hale's personnel file is being turned over. The administrative credential access logs, the ones that show who modified your Nevada scores, are included in the archive. It's unambiguous. Emily waited. I want to say something to you, Ossie said. She said it carefully, in the way of someone who has rehearsed a thing, because they wanted to get it right rather than because they wanted it to sound good. The panel that reviewed your Nevada case, I was not on it, but I was in a position to raise questions about its findings, and I didn't. I reviewed the report, and I found it adequate, and I moved on. She looked at Emily directly. That was a failure. The time-stamped discrepancies that Sandra Kwan identified last night, those were visible in the original panel report. I should have seen them. Emily held her coffee cup with both hands and looked at Osei. Why are you telling me this? She said. Because you deserve a direct acknowledgement and not a bureaucratic letter, Osei said. And because I think it matters that the people who failed you understand specifically how they failed you. Emily was quiet for a moment. What happens to the championship? She said. It'll continue, Osei said. Different form. The Harlan Systems contract is being terminated, which means the electronic scoring platform is out. We go back to physical target scoring and human judges for the remaining stages. She paused. The final stage is scheduled for this afternoon. Under the circumstances, the board is leaving the decision to the competitors. Anyone who wants to withdraw can do so with no penalty. Is anyone withdrawing? Osei almost smiled. Not so far. At 8 in the morning, Emily drove to Tucson Regional Medical Center. She found Derek Vaughn in the ICU, not critical, not anymore, but serious. He had a fractured skull from the impact with the server room floor, a significant concussion, and had been unconscious for the better part of 6 hours. He had regained consciousness at approximately 2 in the morning, a fact Emily had not known because she had been in a federal interview at the time. He was awake when she arrived, propped up in the hospital bed with a bandage wrapping the right side of his head and an IV in his left arm, and the particular diminished quality of someone whose body had been through a genuine trauma and was running. All available resources toward the work of repair. His wife was there, a small woman in her 40s who looked at Emily with an expression that was complicated gratitude and anger and exhaustion and relief, all present simultaneously, none of them dominant. Emily stopped at the door. I can come back, she said. Derek's wife shook her head. No, come in. Emily came in and stood at the side of the bed. Derek looked at her with the focused effort of someone working against a headache that was probably substantial. The archive, he said. His voice was rough. Did it? Complete, she said. Everything. Nevada included. Closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, something had shifted in his face, a release of something he'd been holding long enough that it had started to become part of his expression's default arrangement. Partition, he said. You found it. Yes. I wasn't sure you'd know to look. You told me about it, she said. On the first morning. You said the people running the match don't want anyone asking questions. That was you telling me something without saying it, directly. I thought about it a lot, she paused. The partition, did you build it knowing I was coming to this championship? Derek was quiet for a moment. I built it when I made contact with Teller's office, he said. It's weeks ago. I didn't know how it was going to work out, but I wanted the data to be somewhere that didn't depend on me. He paused. I'm sorry it took me 6 months. You protected your daughter, Emily said. I let you carry a false accusation for 6 months while I sat on the evidence that would have cleared it. You let me carry it for 6 months, Emily said. Hale put it on me 3 years ago. Those are different things. Derek's wife made a small sound that was not quite a word. She was looking at Emily with the complicated expression recalibrated toward something that had more gratitude in it. His daughter, Derek's wife, said, Maya, she stopped. She's been scared since the photograph. She's 12, and she's been scared for 6 months. She doesn't need to be scared anymore, Emily said. The men who did that, they're in federal custody. That's done. Derek's wife nodded. She pressed her lips together and looked at the window. Emily stayed for 15 minutes. She didn't fill the time with conversation. She sat in the chair beside the bed and drank the hospital coffee a nurse had offered her, nursed offered, and let Derek rest in the comfortable quiet of someone who had been through a hard thing and was now on the right side of it. And when she left, she told him she'd be in touch and meant it. She got back to Blackridge at 10:30. The range had reorganized itself in her absence with the pragmatic efficiency of a competitive community that understood the show had to continue, not because nothing had happened, but because the people here had come to shoot, and shooting was the one thing that existed outside the politics of the night. Stage officials had replaced the electronic target system with manual scoring, steel targets with physical impact markers, judges with spotting scopes and clipboards positioned at each station. It was slower and it was imprecise compared to the sensor system, but it was real and it was honest, and it was the way championships had been run for decades before anyone had sold the NTSA on the benefits of electronic scoring. Emily checked in at the competitor desk. The woman behind the desk, a volunteer she recognized from the first day, looked at her badge and then at her face with the expression of someone who had spent the morning processing a great deal of information and was still working through the implications. "You're still in the competition," the woman said, slightly uncertain, as if she expected this to be contested. "I know," Emily said. "Your scores from the prior stages are being reviewed," Emily said. "I know that too. I'm shooting the final stage on the scores I have." The woman looked at her screen. "You're in 11th place on the recorded standings." "I know where I am," Emily said. "What time does the final stage open?" 1400 hours. Emily thanked her and went to the staging area. Logan Pierce was in his bay when she arrived. He was sitting on the bench with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped in front of him, not doing anything, not running equipment checks, not reviewing stage diagrams. Just sitting in the particular stillness of someone who had been through a reckoning and was living in its aftermath. He looked up when she came in. "You're shooting," he said. Surprised? "No." He thought about it. "No, I'm not." He looked at his equipment case. "My coach left this morning. Said the association with the situation was bad for the brand." A short, humorless breath. "He's probably right." "Are you shooting?" Emily said. "I don't know if I should." She set her gear bag on the bench across from him. "You testified to Sorensen last night," she said. "Your stage footage hails conversation with you that's in the federal record now. It doesn't undo 3 years of winning competitions I may not have legitimately won." "No," she said. It doesn't." He looked at her, waiting, she thought, for something absolution or condemnation or some version of judgment that she was not qualified to deliver and had no intention of delivering. "I'm not the person who gets to tell you whether to shoot," she said. "That's yours to decide." She unzipped her gear bag. "But if you're asking me, you came and found me last night and told me the truth when you didn't have to. You could sit quiet. You knew I was already moving, and the thing was already unraveling without your statement." She paused. "You did the right thing when it was expensive. That's worth something." Logan was quiet for a moment. "Not enough," he said. "No," she agreed. "Not enough, but it's what you've got." He sat with that. Then he stood up, slowly, and started opening his equipment case. Emily started on her own. The final stage of the National Tactical Shooting Championship ran across the full length of the Black Ridge Main Line, a composite course that incorporated elements from all prior stages, designed as a summation test of everything the competition had assessed over the preceding days. 7 positions, mixed distances, standing and supported, and prone shooting positions, a timed engagement sequence at each station. Human judges at every position with spotting, scopes, and clipboards and the authority to verify each impact by direct visual observation. No sensors, no electronic transmission, no administrative credentials, and no scoring console in the control tower, and no system that could be accessed by anyone sitting in an air-conditioned room and deciding which shots had happened and which had not. Steel and eyes and clipboards. Emily stood at the first position and breathed. The borrowed backup rifle was gone. She'd returned it to the equipment marshal and signed out a replacement from the competition's loaner inventory. A different platform from what she'd been using, one she'd handled enough times in her training work that it wasn't unfamiliar. Not her rifle, but close enough. She had 45 minutes before the stage opened to calibrate for it, and she used all 45 minutes running dry fire sequences and trigger pull assessments, and a series of position transitions until the rifle's characteristics were mapped in her hands and her muscles understood what they were working with. The desert wind was doing the same thing it had been doing all week, coming off the ridge in unpredictable gusts that required reading rather than fixed adjustment. She had been reading it for 3 days. She knew this wind the way she knew the trigger on the backup rifle, imperfectly, but well enough. Sandra Kwan was at the position to her left. She looked at Emily once before the stage opened, a direct look that required no words and received none. Tapper was 4 positions down. He'd found a pair of eye protection from somewhere and was running a slow breathing rhythm that Emily recognized from people who had done this kind of work in genuine, high-stakes environments. Stage judge's whistle sounded. Emily raised the rifle. The first position was a 300-yard standing engagement, 2 targets, 4-second window each. She settled into the position, found the first target, read the wind off the telltale flags at mid-range, and fired. The steel rang. She transitioned to the second target, adjusted 2 inches left for the wind shift. She could feel in the flag behavior, and fired. Steel rang. The judge's clipboard made a mark. She moved. The second position was supported prone at 450. She went down smoothly, got into the position, established a stable platform, checked the rear bag placement, settled her cheek into the stock. The targets here were partial exposure steel plates behind a plywood barrier arrangement visible at specific angles that required the shooter to position precisely. Found the angle, confirmed the sight picture, broke both shots in sequence. Both rang. She moved. The third position was the one she was most focused on, 550 yards, unsupported standing, the longest and most technically demanding shot of the stage in the worst shooting position. The wind at this end of the range was doing something complicated today. The flags at 500 showed a steady push from her left, at approximately 8 miles per hour, but the flags at downrange showed less movement, which meant the wind was hitting a wall somewhere in the terminal portion of the flight path and deflecting. She needed to hold into the established wind rather than the apparent deflection, which went against the visual instinct. She settled, breathed, held. The shot broke clean. The steel rang with the particular resonance of a solid center hit, not an edge hit, not a low hit, but the full-face impact of a bullet that had arrived where it was aimed. The judge at that position looked through his spotting scope, confirmed, and made his mark. She transitioned. She did not think about Nevada. She did not think about 3 years. She did not think about the server room, or the memory card, or the text message, or the administrative office, or any of the machinery that had ground through the night and produced whatever it had produced. She thought about the wind and the distance and the trigger and the target and the specific, complete, utterly absorbing problem of the next shot. That was all. That was enough. She shot the final 3 positions with the accumulated focus of someone who had been building toward this moment without consciously building toward it. Every stage of the previous days serving as calibration. Every discrepancy noted in her notebook, a data point that had sharpened rather than distracted her. She shot the way she had been trained to shoot, not perfectly, because perfect wasn't a real thing, and she had learned to distrust it, but accurately and consistently, and with the particular authority of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had earned the knowing. When she stepped through the exit gate of the final position, she didn't check her score immediately. She stood for a moment with the rifle at her side and looked down the length of the range at the steel targets still in their positions, at the judges with their clipboards, the Black Ridge complex spread out in the afternoon sunlight with the eastern ridge beyond it and the pale desert beyond that running off to the horizon without apology. She had competed on this range 3 times now. The first time she had been disqualified by a lie. The second time she had nearly been destroyed by the same people protecting the same lie. The third time she had shot the final stage of a national championship with a borrowed rifle and a night's worth of no sleep, and the particular clarity of someone who had nothing left to protect except the truth. She thought that was about right. The final standings from the manual scored stage were posted at 5:15 p.m. Emily's Stage 5 performance placed her first in that stage by 2 points. Combined with the reviewed and corrected scores from stages 1 through 4, Patricia, Osi, and a panel of 3 independent judges had spent the afternoon comparing raw censor logs against recorded public scores. This use fixtures and the discrepancies across Emily's performance, once corrected, were substantial. Her overall standing shifted. The board posted the corrected combined standings at 5:47 p.m. Emily Carter, first overall. She was standing at the back of the crowd when the board updated. She saw her name at the top of the list and stood there looking at it with the particular stillness of someone who had anticipated a moment for so long that when it arrived, it didn't feel like she'd imagined it would feel. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt true. Those were different things, and she was glad they were different, because true was the thing that lasted, and triumph was the thing that faded, and she had spent 3 years wanting the true version. Sandra Kwan was beside her. She had placed third. She did not say anything immediately. Stood with Emily and looked at the board. "You okay?" Sandra said finally. "Getting there," Emily said. Sandra nodded. That was enough. The crowd around the board was doing the natural thing that crowds did when something they hadn't expected had happened: the reorganization of understanding, the processing of a narrative that had shifted under them. Some of the competitors came to Emily directly. Tapper came, shook her hand once with the grip of someone who communicated in actions rather than words, and that was the entirety of what he said. One of the competition judges she didn't know well stopped and said something brief and genuine. The broadcast network journalist, Nadia Reyes, asked for a proper interview that Emily agreed to on the condition that she have 20 minutes first. She used the 20 minutes to call Derek Vaughn's room at Tucson Regional. His wife answered. "He's sleeping," she said. "He had a good afternoon." "Tell him when he wakes up," Emily said. "Tell him it's done." Pause. "What does that mean?" "What's done?" "He'll know," Emily said. Logan Pierce's competition results were suspended pending investigation review. He issued a public statement 3 days later, not through a publicist, not through a spokesperson, but directly, in his own words, posted to his own channels without the production his team usually applied. He acknowledged the scoring anomalies he had observed and failed to report. He acknowledged Hale's conversation and his decision to stay quiet about it. He withdrew from national competition pending the investigation's conclusion and donated his prize earnings from the prior 3 years to a competitive shooting development fund for junior athletes. It was not enough. He knew it wasn't enough, and he said so in the statement, which was the thing that made it different from a PR calculation. Emily read it once and didn't read it again. Marcus Hale was indicted on federal charges 12 weeks after his arrest at Blackridge wire fraud, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and 4 counts related to the assault on Derek Vaughn. Harlan Systems settled with federal regulators before the indictment, paying a substantial fine and agreeing to dissolve the specific data collection program, though the broader corporate entity continued operating under modified defense contractor compliance requirements. The full competitor list that Emily had asked Hale to produce was included in the federal discovery materials, 23 names across 6 competitions, spanning 5 years. Disqualifications, score modifications, careers interrupted or ended. Letters went out to all 23. Emily was not the one who wrote them, but she was on the committee that reviewed their contents before they were sent. She had asked to be, and the NTSA had agreed, and she sat in a conference call with 3 associated lawyers and OSE and read every draft carefully and pushed back on the language once for accuracy, once for tone. She thought the people receiving Those letters deserved language that acknowledged what had happened to them clearly and without bureaucratic insulation. And she said so, and most of her suggestions were incorporated. Derek Vaughn's medical bills were covered in full by the NTSA's liability settlement. He spent 6 weeks recovering, returned to work at a different range facility in New Mexico, and sent Emily a text on the day he started his new job that said only, "Day 1. Feels different. Thank you." She sent back, "You did the hard part. I just showed up." That wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either, and sometimes the most honest thing you could say was somewhere in the middle. 4 months after the Black Ridge Championship, Emily returned to the complex for the first time since the final stage. It was a different kind of visit, not competition, not investigation. The NTSA, in the process of rebuilding its competition oversight infrastructure and attempting to demonstrate genuine institutional change rather than the appearance of it, had posted a new position, Director of Competition Integrity. The role was responsible for independent oversight of scoring systems, competitor grievance processes, and the development of protocols that would prevent the kind of systemic manipulation that had operated under Hale for 5 years. They had offered it to Emily. She had told them she would think about it. She thought about it for 3 weeks, which was how long it took her to understand that the part of her that wanted to say no was the same part that had always wanted to walk away from difficult things in the years after Nevada, and that she had spent 3 years learning to stop listening to that part. She accepted. She was standing on the main firing line when O.C. came out of the main building and walked across the range to where she was. The range was quiet, no competition today, just the particular empty piece of a working facility between uses. The steel targets were visible down the line, waiting. "First day," O.C. said. Emily said. "I was here a few months ago." "That was different." "Yes," Emily said. "It was." O.C. stood beside her, and they looked at the range together for a moment. "I want to be honest with you about something," O.C. said. "All right. Some people on the board think this appointment is optics. That we hired you because it looks good, the vindicated competitor, overseeing the system that wronged her. They're not entirely wrong that it looks good." She paused. "But I pushed for you because you're the best qualified person for this role. You identified the manipulation in 3 days from the inside with no authority and no resources. You documented it. You preserved the evidence. You transmitted it, and you did it all while people with institutional power were actively trying to stop you." She looked at Emily. "That's not optics. That's the job description." Emily was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to be difficult to manage," she said. "I assumed. If I find something wrong in this system, I'm going to say so directly and publicly, and I'm not going to wait for committee approval." "I know," O.C. said. "That's also in the job description." Emily looked at the range, at the steel targets and the empty line and the ridge beyond the complex where the desert started, and ran for a long way without caring about any of this. She thought about the night in the motel room with the text message on her phone, the server room floor with Derek's blood on it, the PA handset in her hand, the control tower and Hale's face when the composure cracked. She thought about Nevada 3 years ago, standing outside the hearing room after the ruling came down with the particular understanding that something had just been taken from her that she hadn't given anyone permission to take. She thought about how long it had taken to find her way back. Not a straight line. Nothing like a straight line. Wrong turns and false starts and months where getting up in the morning, met and going to the range and coaching junior shooters in New Mexico was the entire scope of what she could manage. And that had to be enough until it wasn't anymore. Not a hero's journey, a person's journey messier, slower, less satisfying in the middle than stories made it sound. But here, she raised the rifle she'd brought from her truck, her rifle, the one she'd had modified before Nevada, the one she'd been shooting for 6 years, the one that had sat in her equipment bay through all of it. She'd had it fully inspected and recalibrated after the Black Ridge Championship. Every component checked, every modification she'd made over the years verified. It was hers. It had always been hers. She raised it toward the 300-yard target at the far end of the line. Breathed, fired. The steel rang. She lowered the rifle and looked at the target. She had lost 3 years to a lie. She had gotten angry about it, and then she had stopped being angry about it, and then she had stopped being angry about it, and then she had gotten angry about it again, in different ways, on different days, and none of those feelings had been wrong or right. They had just been the mong, then the actual through, while she was doing the work of finding her way back to herself. You didn't get those years returned to you. That wasn't how it worked. The time was gone, and the cost was real, and the people who took it from her would answer for what they did. But the answering didn't give the years back. Nothing did. What you got, if you kept going, was everything after. Kept going. She was standing on the firing line at Black Ridge Shooting Complex in Arizona on a quiet morning with a job she'd earned and a rifle she'd kept and a name that was clear, and the desert spread out around the range in every direction in its permanent, indifferent way, and the steel target 300 yards away still carried the mark of the last shot she'd put through it. That was enough. That was, in fact, exactly enough. She turned to Osei. "Show me the new scoring protocols," she said. "I want to see everything." They walked back toward the main building together, and the range was quiet behind them, and the morning light on the pale rock was clean and direct and called everything by its actual name. The system will try to bury the ones who see clearly. Don't stop seeing.